Penny, great to see you.
It's wonderful to see you all too, everybody, and I was so looking forward to being able to see everybody in person in
Yeah,
Albuquerque, and then we got slapped into a new
no,
reality.
yeah, these are new
So,
times, aren't they?
but everybody is well and healthy, and please stay that way.
Amen to that. Uh,
Okay.
I'd like to just welcome everybody to our book club featuring award-winning novelist and playwright Penny Micklebury, who is also a teacher and a mentor and an all-around good person. Welcome to the book club, Penny.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for being here and for reading the stuff I write. That's really kind of wonderful.
We love the stuff you write. Uh,
Thank you.
Tonight we're doing something a little bit different, Penny. We have a co-host, and it's Elizabeth Anderson, somebody you know, who's
I
in
do
Kansas City.
indeed know Elizabeth Anderson.
And
Hello,
Elizabeth,
Penny.
for those who don't know, Elizabeth hosts the Sandra Moran Radio Book Club at KKFI in Kansas City, Missouri, once a month. She's a great interviewer, and we're happy to have her here to talk about your book. We love your book, and we both read your book a couple of times, so we have a leg up maybe on some other people.
Thank you. Well, may I say that I have been privileged to be hosted by Elizabeth Anderson on the Sandra Moran Radio Club. So this is a second treat for me. Thank you again.
So, Penny, what we normally do is have our authors start off with a 5-minute reading. Are you prepared to do that?
Um, I can. What
We can ask you a couple of questions.
my issue is that, pardon me, I do have some vision issues, which means that I need to hold the book here.
Okay.
Um, and since it took me this long to get able to see you all,
Right.
I don't want to ask you to dismiss me immediately, but I do need to hold the book up close these days,
That's perfectly okay.
which means
That's
I
perfectly
can't look out and have meaningful gazes with my audience because I have to look at the book. So
okay.
if you guys can stand that,
We can
um,
definitely stand it. We can definitely
okay,
stand that. Do
okay.
you want us to pitch you a question or two first? You want to warm up? Or are you good?
I can do whatever you guys want me to do. I can read immediately. We can talk first, and then I can read because with this book, I read the opening simply
Ah,
because trying to step into the middle of it, if somebody is not familiar with it, they will have absolutely no idea
I
what
think that's
is
a good
being
place to start, don't
discussed.
you, Elizabeth?
So does that work for you guys?
Yeah. No, when I was rereading it a couple of days ago, I thought the beginning really is a nice setup to the whole thing.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
So go ahead. Why don't you do that?
And that's what I'll do. Um, and I'm gonna have to shed some light on this thing. I hope this is not really screwing up everybody's visuals. Slave catcher. The hissed word hung in the air, freezing Eugenia Oliver's insides colder than the damp November evening air chilled her skin. Though Eli's bare feet made no sound on the worn cobblestones and his two brief words were whispered, Jeannie's body reverberated as if a cannon had been fired next to her. She was headed home. She was almost there, almost safe and warm. But she changed direction and walked toward Main Street. The fast, loud pounding of her heart and her suddenly dry mouth were her fear manifested. If a slave catcher really was prowling in the quarter and Jeannie really was walking toward him instead of running away, dressed as Eugene Oliver, as she often was, because even a black man was safer than a black woman alone, she moved with purpose toward the danger coming her way. The white man slowed his gait from a trot to a long-legged stride as he entered Thatcher Lane. definitely looking for someone. His head swiveled from side to side. His eyes searched, but found nothing but shuttered windows and barred doors. Jenny was annoyed with herself. She should have heard the danger in the silence. It was supper time in Thatcher Lane. There should have been the clamor of children and women, the clatter of horses and wagons. There should have been the call of the lamplighter. Instead, there was the silence of fear that only the presence of a white man could bring, and the anger. That was more dangerous than the fear. Jeannie took a deep breath and caressed the Derringer pistol in her pocket. She and the white man were close together now. She knew her neighbors could see her as clearly as the stranger. She also knew that inside half a dozen of the barred and shuttered windows were pistols and shotguns aimed at the white man. If he were foolish enough or arrogant enough to come alone into their lane looking for runaway slaves, he would die foolish and arrogant. And then they all would die worse than that, because even in Philadelphia, the killing of a white person was the most unforgivable of transgressions. They would die and their homes would be burned to ashes. Jeannie shivered, and November was not to blame. This man, however, was no slave catcher, and Jeannie was certain of that, though she could not imagine who he was, and certainly not what he wanted. Not in this area of Philadelphia, inhabited solely by blacks, free and otherwise. The man removed his hat as Jeannie approached, nodded a greeting, and spoke before she could speak. "Good evening, sir." Jeannie returned to the greeting, adding a question. "Have you lost your way?" "I've lost a boy I was chasing." "Is the boy a thief?" "Why, no, not that I'm aware." "Ah, if not a thief, then why was I chasing him? A good question, and I've a good answer." The man spoke confidently. "He has information I need, but he ran when I approached him. I chased him and saw him turn into this lane. Perhaps you saw him?" And the man described Eli as if he possessed an artist's etching of the boy. Jeannie studied the stranger. His clothes were well made and of good quality, though not the clothes of a wealthy man. But confidence aside, he seemed too worldly to be naive enough to chase a black man into his own residential quarter, given the unrest of recent times, not to mention the encroaching darkness. "Do you know where you are, sir?" "I am lost, to tell the truth." He allowed his words to trail off as he looked very closely at the black man to find the deeper meaning of his question. "I know I am in the Black Quarter, if that's what you're asking." "The boy you were chasing thinks you're a slave catcher." "Good God!" Jeannie watched the surprise spread across the man's chiseled features, and then the revulsion, and finally the denial. "I am nothing of the sort. It is a heinous and cruel occupation, worthy of— I can think of no worthy punishment." Jeannie could think of several worthy punishments, but she dared not speak them. After all, the stranger was a white man, even if not a slave catcher. "Will you walk with me out to the main street, sir, so the lamplighter can begin his duties and the people resume theirs?" Jeannie turned and walked slowly out of the dark lane. She had turned her back to a white man, a stranger. She hoped he would follow. The stranger turned a scrutinizing gaze on his location. Houses lined both sides of the narrow street, and even in the swiftly falling dusk, he could see they were well tended, as were the tiny gardens that fronted them. He noticed slight movement at several curtained windows in the round darkness of at least two long gun barrels aimed at him. Smoke rose from practically every chimney, yet no lamplight was visible in any of the more than 24 houses of various shapes and sizes that fronted the street. Dark without, and without as the lamplighter stood silent and watchful and fearful. And he himself was the cause of the darkness and the fear. He hurried to catch up to Jeannie. "Boston and New York have gas lights in the street," he muttered. as much to have something to say as to cover the shame he felt at causing so much unnecessary discomfort. As does Philadelphia, Jeannie answered in a reasonable if subdued tone, just a bit west and south of here. The stranger grunted acknowledgment of that truth and an understanding of the reason for it. He and Jeannie stood at the intersection of the lane and the main road where the already lit oil lamps were smoking and sputtering. They cast a golden glow on the carriages and cars and shops of the wide avenue that ran perpendicular to Thatcher Lane. It was a mostly commercial avenue, though there were a few houses, all of which appeared to be owned by a colored person. Not only was this avenue unfamiliar to him, it was foreign to him. It was a fully functional commercial street, and before this moment, he had not known it existed. I'm Ezra Mackay, he said, extending his hand. I apologize to you and your neighbors. I meant you no harm. Eugene Oliver is my name, and your apology is accepted, Jeannie replied, returning the firm grip. And if I can help you, Mr. Mackay, talk to that boy for you, I will, unless you intend to bring harm to him. And then you will not help? I will not. Is that enough?
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
You set up the suspense that is to follow and introduce two of the many characters of the book. That's wonderful, Penny. Why don't I ask Elizabeth to ask the first question?
All right. One question that I had was, I'll ask this. Harriet Tubman is an essential character in your novel, but we never meet her. What made you decide to keep her off camera, as it were?
Two primary things. The first being Harriet Tubman is a star in her own right, and to have her on the page makes the book about her. And the book, of the many things that it's about, is about the people, some of the people who supported her work, who were the engines and the wheels and the cars of the Underground Railroad. And many of them never met her in person. They had assignments, which was to make certain that when she arrived, things would be safe for her, that she would be welcomed, that her charges would be safe, and then to be borne on to their next location. Because although Philadelphia was a destination for some people, the majority of Blacks who were running from slavery wanted to get to Canada. They wanted to get out of the United States. My other reason is that I am a novelist. I am not an historian. And when writing about historical figures, it is absolutely essential to get it right. And it was a considerable amount of work, although I didn't mind it because I do enjoy research. But to get Philadelphia right, to get Philadelphia in the middle 1850s, to get it right, and to get the people who may have lived in Philadelphia at that time, to get them right, the Black people and the white people. So to add an iconic figure would have, as I said, made the story about her, and it would have made me have to do a lot more work than I was prepared to do. And I will say, I will tell you this, although I'm sure we could talk about it a little later, but I am working on, there is a sequel to this book, and it ends the sequel just before the Civil War begins, although it is clear that war is imminent, because I am not an historian. And if you're going to write a Civil War book, you sure better get it right. And I don't have 5 years to do the research into the machinations of the Civil War. So that's why Mrs. Tubman is not on the page. But I liked having her present. I liked having her be real to the people who were charged with keeping her safe.
Thank you.
Penny, I have a question. I'm going to read it because it comes from one of your Amazon reviews. It's from Heather Rose Jones, who's a fantasy and fiction, historical fiction writer. And she says about your book, Penny Micklebury braids together the historic romance and thriller genres in a story about personal and racial relationships and found family in Philadelphia on the eve of the Civil War. I think that's a really nice encapsulation of your book. Your book is a grand undertaking. Elizabeth and I were talking about how many characters there are and there are multiple themes. What started you on the journey of writing this particular book?
What became this book began life as a short story that I wanted to submit, and the dual protagonists were a Pinkerton's agent and a black man that he employed to help him, because he realized that there were places he just simply could not go, that there were people that he would need information from who would never talk to him. And it has always sort of boggled my mind, and to some extent it still does, that there are groups and classes of white people who think that because they have employed a servant, that these men and women don't hear what they say, don't understand what they say, don't find meaning in the words. And I don't, that really does confound me. So here's a guy who said, I need information, and the servants are not going to tell it to me. And then as often happens with projects, I put it in the drawer. And I was having a conversation with the wonderful Salem West about historical fiction. And she was just telling me how much she liked it, how much she enjoyed it. And into my brain, fully formed, sprang this story. I thought to myself, suppose I make the private eye who's helping the ex-Pinkerton guy, suppose I make this person a woman. Because after all, Elizabeth, Harriet Tubman was a spy for the Union Army. And that's how that started. And I asked Salem, I said, did you have any interest? And before I could finish talking, she said, girl, go to work. So I was like, okay. and that's the genesis of that story, that making this woman sort of a private detective, but also making use of the knowledge that many women disguise themselves as men, especially if they had to be out alone, because it was not a safe place for a woman alone. And not just black women, many white women disguise themselves, housekeepers and cooks, the working class, because they weren't safe either. It wasn't just the West that was wild and woolly. Women were not safe. So that's how that book came to be.
Let me just follow up on something you said about women disguising themselves as men to have agency in the world. You mentioned a couple of times in the book that women often can see through the disguise immediately, yet men very often, mostly, do not. What was what observation were you making there?
Well, the general observation is that men generally don't see women.
Hmm.
Um, if if men find a woman physically attractive, they see a potential sex object.
Mhm.
If they don't find a woman particularly attractive, they don't see her at all. She doesn't exist. And so for women who had to move through the world, um, being disguised as a man meant that they really weren't noticed. They could go wherever they needed to go, and do it quickly. You know, if they were on the way to work, be quick about it, get there and get there soon. And that was just the thing. And it was on the East Coast where this happened, and particularly in the West, where outlaw behavior was the norm. So women had to do many things to protect themselves, and truth is that has to happen today. Too many women have to do too many things to protect themselves, to keep themselves safe. Um, that's just a reality. And when we put um, a rapist in the White House and one on the Supreme Court, and it even today it's accepted behavior.
Yeah.
That boys will be boys crap.
Elizabeth, you got a question?
I do. You talked about her being out and about in the city of Philadelphia. And in many historical novels, I feel as if I'm visiting a city as a tourist, but you actually placed me in Philadelphia. Your descriptions of the housing, the back street, where she has to turn sideways
Mm-hmm.
to access her house, and all the transportation, the carriages, the mule carts, that must have been a lot of research.
It was, but I will tell you a dirty little secret. I love research. I always have. Um, I love history. I always have. And so this for me is the best of many worlds. And I have spent a good part of my life reading the history of Black Americans. I am fascinated by our history, the the facts of our history, but just generally the fact that we survived, that we're still here. That that to me, there are days when it still confounds me. And um, the incident the other night of the young man who was murdered while jogging, it just there are no words. There are no words. But I have done a lot of reading, and one of the most intriguing comments to me about this book came from Catherine Mayorisi, whom I'm sure many of you probably already know.
I think she's on the
Writes
line.
great
I think
mysteries.
she's actually, Penny, I think
I'm
she's
sorry.
actually on the line. I think she's on with
I
us
think she's
today.
here.
Hey, Catherine.
Hey,
And I told her this. She said one of the most interesting things. She said she had never realized how claustrophobic it was to be Black in America. And that blew my
Hmm.
socks off, because that's exactly, certainly in that time and place, and to an extent now, it is a claustrophobic existence because you have to be so careful about where you go and what you do, and hope you don't upset anybody. I mean, I'm sure you remember that Henry Louis Gates was arrested on his own front porch because some cop thought he was trying to break into his own house. And this was 3, 4, 5 years ago. I mean, this was not in 1856 Philadelphia. So
Right.
when she said that, I thought, wow, that's really something. And it's not your exact quote, Catherine, but I hope it's close enough.
It is.
Penny, I thought Eugenia was such an interesting character. She was so smart. She intelligent, had a lot of guile, talks about how she uses her anger to survive. She was a really complex character who to me felt as if she could be, like born in the Born Supremacy. She certainly could be a general like George Washington. She was the person who was the strategist behind the escape of or the recapture of the guy that they were looking for. I mean, she was an amazing character. How was it that you imbued her with so many of these characteristics that we most often find in fiction in male characters?
She is, for me, the embodiment of Black women I have known all of my life. It's what you had to do to survive. And if you remember in this book, she was educated
Right.
by the woman who owned her because the woman hated ignorant Black people. She did not want an ignorant Black person in her house. So she hired people to educate Eugenia when she was a girl so that she would not be just another ignorant Black person in her house. And the woman who taught her saw in her an intelligence, and they just ran with it. It's like, okay, she can learn, so whatever she can learn, let's teach it to her.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about it, I mean, how would Harriet Tubman, who was unlettered, how would she manage to get herself from the eastern shore of Maryland up through the woods
Mm-hmm.
and into Philadelphia, and to get out of the South more than once, to go back and get people and to come back? I think that of the many injustices that have been inflicted upon Black people is this notion that a lack of scholarship suggests ignorance when it absolutely does not. Native intelligence exists in all beings.
Mm-hmm.
Having to survive without being taught, I think, is a particular skill. And I mean, when you think that the first Blacks who came in chains were Africans, English was not their native language, or whoever was owning them, somebody from Scotland or Ireland or Holland, they didn't understand those people. So they had to figure out what they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to do it. And if they didn't get it right fast enough, they got beat. what are you supposed to do with that? You figure out real fast what you're supposed to do so you don't get beat again. So that is what I take with me into these characters. I bring that, and it is the respect that I have for them, the admiration, because survival under those circumstances, again, I mean, it boggles my mind that I am still here. I who am descendant from people like that, because by all rights, they all of them should have died, given how they were treated. And yet, here I am. You know, my grandmother was a college graduate. That is sheer will. That is sheer will. And I'm just grateful to be a descendant of people who were that brave and that strong, because I don't think I got it. You know, I don't think that I have that kind of strength and courage. And I'm glad I don't have to prove it.
Elizabeth, you mind if I ask one more question before I come back to you?
Please do.
So Penny, one of the things I was thinking about is, you know, it could be a book that is filled with anger and leaves your reader filled with anger, but it's not, because you do a great service, I think, to all the characters in the book, both black and white, in giving them full humanity. There's a lot of bad people who are white people in this book, and some black people who are not, you know, held in the highest esteem. But you know, there are a couple of white characters who are really admirable. What was your thinking in doing that and talking about slavery, having likable, admirable, memorable white characters?
If all white people were evil, I wouldn't be here talking to you, because we'd have been wiped out, truly.
You're right.
Certainly, greed and avarice had a lot to do with it, because black people were property, and they brought in the money. I mean, can you imagine owning a factory where you don't have to pay the people who work there? Even if you pay them poorly, you got to pay them. Well, then they didn't have to. So it would not have served them very well to destroy what was making money for them. And a lot of that was necessity. But I suppose, Cheryl, that the current occupant of the White House notwithstanding, pure evil, I think, generally gets mitigated somehow, somewhere. And the other part of that is, I don't want that kind of evil inside of me. I don't want to have to write page after page of some evil individual, which is why the woman who owned Jeannie on the Maryland plantation, I didn't spend a lot of time with her, because she was just flat out evil, and I didn't want to spend any more time with her. Because yeah, those people exist, and her brother, who lives in Philadelphia, the doctor, I don't want to spend a lot of time with him either. Although I did want to see him get taken down a peg and get his comeuppance, and so we made that happen.
In an elegant way.
Yeah, but just like all white people aren't evil, all black people aren't noble. I mean, there's some people in this book, a traitor, people are who they are.
Mhm.
And my job as the storyteller, because that is how I see myself, as a storyteller, is to try to introduce and blend as much of human nature as I can. And I don't think we're all that different
Mhm.
from our ancestors, really. We live in a different way, but just like those guys riding around in that truck who shot that young man who was jogging, they would have done that same thing 150 years ago. That's who they are.
Mhm. Elizabeth?
Well, we had a comment from Amelia, and she said the historical figures become so real because they are being seen from the eyes of those living at that time. And for me, one of the most effective parts of the novel are the stories of Jack and Eli and Eugenia from their days as former slaves and their escapes. And I was fascinated by the fact that two of them escaped, well, essentially by water.
Mm-hmm.
And Eugenia had not only literacy, but also she was an incredibly talented seamstress.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you pick those three stories?
Well, the water was to make a point. To this day, there are large numbers of Black people who do not swim, who do not like water, and people have often wondered, well, why is that? And that has to do with that crossing from Africa. In the hull, in the bottom of that boat, and all of the people that died on that crossing, and the people who were chained to them as they expired. Water was not a happy place. So for someone to use it as an escape points to the desperation.
Mhm.
That's how much freedom meant. That's how much it meant to those people to get out of slavery. Eli jumped in the river, and Jack was forced by the man who owned him to work on the fishing boats. But if you remember, his parents, particularly his father, said, I'm not going near that water, not going near it. Jeannie doesn't like water. When it was thought that Jack was missing, well, they knew he was missing, and perhaps was going to be sold down south. As much as she cares for her friend Maggie, she was not going to go help look for him, because it meant going on the water and maybe going south, and she just would not do that. Making her a seamstress was just a reflection of what was important to women in that time and place. And wardrobe was everything, and it was all handmade. There were no sewing machines, and there was no technology. It was all done by hand, and a fine seamstress was a prize. And which is why the master was taking her to Washington D.C. to sell. He said that she's, especially in an important city like Washington D.C. and up on the East Coast, a talented seamstress was worth a lot of money. And she was a smart girl. She learned how to sew. She had a reputation as being an excellent seamstress, and that in the long run is what saved her. And it helped her earn a living, you know, because she was now able to repurpose garments. Repurpose is the term we use today, but when clothes were given to her in her shop, she could take a ball gown and make 3 or 4 outfits out of it for poor Black women, because you know nobody could afford to use all that material on one outfit, as did wealthy women. So it served her well, and it saved her.
The scenes about the clothing, which are numerous and so vivid, and how important it was to have warm clothing for the work people had to do, that was just remarkable, and it just really added a lot of humanity, I thought, to the story. I wanted to ask you about writing the love story between Eugenia and Abbie, and given that this is historical fiction, I wondered if you saw those love scenes, women loving women love scene set in 1850, as having a different set of values and characteristics than it would if it were a contemporary story.
Absolutely, absolutely. In general, sex and intimacy were not discussed and dealt with openly in that time and place, between anybody, between women, between men and women, between men. It was not talked about. The love between 2 women is not a new thing. I sometimes think that of course, not just young women, young people think that everything they do is brand new because they're doing it. And that's not the case. But there was no language for it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nobody to ask. There was nothing to be done. But people have feelings for each other, so you do the best you can. But I didn't put it on the page because I didn't know how to put it on the page. I don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I'm not an historian, and I didn't have, a couple of years to spend trying to figure out what 2 women who loved each other in 1856 would have done to manifest that. And it didn't matter, really. What was interesting to me was that one of them was a wealthy white woman, and the other was a runaway slave. And yet these 2 people found a common ground. And it goes back, I think, to something that Elizabeth, you asked, or maybe it was Cheryl, I don't remember. This was a person who was intrinsically good, Abigail Reed was, but who really knew nothing about slavery. She took people as they came to her. And once she understood how devastating slavery was, she hated it with everything in her. She hated it with everything in her, and was perfectly willing to put herself and her fortune at risk to figure out how can we do something about this? And she told Jeannie that if you have to leave, I will come with you. And Jeannie said, well, you can't leave your mansion and your fortune. And her response was, it doesn't matter. None of that stuff really matters. And yeah, I can leave it, and I will leave it.
Penny, we have another question from Catherine Mayorisi, who says, besides feeling the claustrophobia of being Black, I was struck by the weather as a character. It was cold the whole time I was reading. Was that on purpose?
Yes, yes. I frequently use weather as a character. If Beth is out there somewhere, she knows from my writing academy classes that I often use weather because it determines so much about what human beings can and cannot do. And it provides opportunities for people to be ingenious, for people to be creative. It saves people because you can hide. Particularly in a blizzard, you can escape from a cruel master. And sometimes you have to stop everything because the weather is too intense. I had a student in the Writing Academy who set a book she was writing in Nevada. And I told her the first thing I liked was that she didn't make it, we didn't see a casino at all, which was great because, Nevada, I mean, people live in Nevada. It's not just casinos and nightclubs. They're real people. And yes, some of them work in the casinos, a lot of them, I guess, but they have to have jobs. But the one thing she didn't do is use the weather. And I suggested that she do, because it gets so hot in the desert, ridiculously hot in the desert. It's dangerously hot in the desert. And if you don't know how to manage it and what to do, it'll kill you. Is it the Rudyard Kipling quote, "Mad dogs and Englishmen" in the heat of the noonday sun in India? Nobody's out. The first time I went to the Caribbean and I was having such a good time, oh my God, I was loving the beach and the water and the rum punches, and I got burnt to a crisp. And then I realized at long about noontime, people who live there disappear. And it's like, where are they? Where are all the brothers and sisters? Inside. Because that sun will kill you. And I lost 2 days on the beach. I was burned so badly. But I love weather. And Catherine, I wish I had been thinking, ooh, I want to show how claustrophobic this is. And that wasn't what I was thinking. But what I was thinking was that people are confined in many different ways. And if you're not free to move about because of your color, add the dimension of weather. You can't move about. And so you're stuck where you are. And there were no earth movers. You had a horse and a cart.
Right.
And a buggy. And that's it. And the horse can't go, the buggy can't go, ergo, you can't go. So you're stuck where you are.
Penny, we're at 9 o'clock. Can you go another 5 minutes with us?
Absolutely. You won't let me
Well,
talk that long? Okay.
we started a little bit late. I wanted to ask you about your writing. You write lots of different genre.
Mhm.
You write a fabulous mystery series that we all like. Do you like mixing it up, writing some things different from time to time?
I do. I do. Stories present themselves to me, characters present themselves to me, and I don't always know who they are or where they belong. I also write stage plays, and
Yeah.
sometimes these things present themselves, and my method is to just allow them to be. I just I let them percolate and marinate, and I get pieces of dialogue and things, and that generally tells me, for instance, whether it's a novel or a play. I As much as I love history, I started writing mysteries, and so I just kept doing it. I kept doing it, and writing historical fiction um, just didn't happen for me until it did. And now that it has, I don't want to do anything but write
Wow.
historical fiction.
Wow.
Of course, I can't do that because I'm in the middle of editing the new Mimi Jana,
Yeah.
and so that has to get done. And then I can turn my attention to finishing the sequel to
Right.
Wings. And I really think I'd like to write some more historical fiction because I
No.
really love it. I love history, but I love a good mystery. I do. Um, like trying to figure out as you do, Cheryl, who gets dead and who done it, and and uh, and that's a good challenge. Wouldn't you agree?
I do.
Yes, I know you do.
And some people deserve to die. So
Some people do, and which is a good thing that we can write these things.
you're right about it.
Yeah, yeah. You can write them out and get them done the way they deserve to get done, and you're still a good person because
Yes,
after
sir.
all, you just tell stories.
Elizabeth, do you have a last question?
I do. You had an illustrious career in journalism, and a reporter wants to get it right. And in your
Mhm.
novels, you get it right. How does your having been a journalist affect your writing?
Every day, all day, and it's what you said. I mean, there is this attention to detail. Not only do I want to get it right in telling these stories, but I have to. It's I was a reporter in the old days where um, there were 2 and 3 and 4 editors that you had to get through before a story was ever slotted to appear in the paper or to get you on the news. You had to get it right, and we wanted to get it right. Um, as you well know, we journalism was an honorable profession. It wasn't a job that just any damn fool could do, and people would wake up and go, "Oh, I think I'll be a reporter today." That's not how it worked. So it colors everything I do, and that business about research. I mean, you I taught a class once to a group of kids. I don't think they understood, had no idea what I was talking about, but context. And I was trying to get them to see that stories don't happen in, oh, go away, in a vacuum. If something has happened, something happened before this thing happened.
Mhm.
and you got to know what it was. You got to do the research. You got to figure out because something didn't just jump off. I mean, I have seen very few in my life, very few things that could be considered something new under the sun. So yeah, I guess it's still in me. I don't know that I could be a reporter today because you don't expect the press secretary of the president to lie.
And there
You
aren't
don't
many
expect the
editors.
president to lie. Yeah, in the sense, I mean, you don't expect that. You could not like them. I've covered some really crappy people over the years, but you might say to yourself as you're working a story, well, he's full of crap. But I don't know that I've ever then said he's lying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I ever said that to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think I ever did. I just say he's full of shit. That's not right. You can't do that. But I never, in all those years, looked at somebody I was covering and said he's lying. So no, I couldn't be a reporter today. Glad I'm not.
Yeah. Penny, a last observation, and maybe you were aware of this. So your book came out in what month in 2019?
May,
Was it early 2019?
in May.
So May.
Yeah.
And then in November 2019, the movie, yeah. Were you aware that movie was coming, or
I lost
were
you.
you able to use the interest in the movie? Okay, I said your book came out early 2019. The
Mm-hmm.
movie Harriet
Mm-hmm.
came out November same year. Were you aware of the movie?
Mm-hmm.
Was it just coincidence that these two wonderful stories about Harriet Tubman came out in the same year?
Coincidence.
Yeah.
Coincidence. Yeah. I mean, I suppose if I were better at shameless self-promotion, I would have been able to figure out how to tie my book to the Harriet Tubman film. But no, those things happened totally independently of each other.
Maybe it's just the flow of the universe, that story
I
needing to
guess,
be.
yeah. But I had nothing to do with the film, and the film had nothing to do with my book.
Penny, it has been a delight to have a chance to talk to you. To hear, I haven't ever heard you read because when at GCLS, I must have been doing other things while you were reading. So it was delightful to hear you read. It was
Thank
great.
you.
I love this book, Two Wings to Fly Away. Looking forward to the sequel, and also looking forward to the next Mimi and Gianna book because I love mysteries and I love your series.
Thank you.
So,
I am so happy to have been able to share with the two of you. It's really quite wonderful, and I thank you. And I know we will see each other again. I don't know when that will be, but I really do hope that it will be sooner rather than much later. Although I'm afraid it won't be in the immediate future. But
right. Yeah.
I wish you both well, and I thank you so much for your time and attention. And whoever our audience is, I know you said Catherine Mayorisi is out there, and
Yeah, we have several GCLS members,
I know.
or so, a dozen or so GCLS members who have been listening in very attentively.
Yay.
Go out and buy Two Wings to Fly Away if you haven't bought it. Recommend it to people who would like it. I want to let you know that next month, our Pride Month, our June book club is going to feature Curious Wine. I guess
Oh,
you know that one, huh?
one of my
And
favorite books.
Wars.
Yeah.
That's for some of us, that's our coming out book. So we're going to have Catherine talk about that book, and she's going to be interviewed by an up and coming lesfic writer. Queer. She wouldn't like me calling her a lesfic writer. I think a queer writer, Ray Magden, who writes fantasy and romance, and it'll be the new generation of women-loving women writers talking to the classic generation of women-loving women
That's
authors.
great. I will tune in. That's one of my favorite books, but I was kind of already way out by then, but that's, but I still enjoyed the book, and Catherine is one of my absolute most favorite people. So, yeah, I'll be tuning in for that. So thank you both very, very much appreciated.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
tuning in. I know it's early for you out there in the West Coast. Enjoy, stay safe.
It was hot there. It was 90 today in Los Angeles. So yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you,
Love
Penny.
you.
Thank you. And everybody who was out there, thank you for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Thank you,
So
Penny.
that's a wrap for the May Book Club. We'll see you next month. Thank you very much, Penny, and thank you very much, Elizabeth. You did a great job.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Penny, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy and Beth, so much for being in the background and making things go run smoothly.
I wanted to tell Penny that there's several WA students here to see you as well. So.
Oh, great. Is that Beth? Hey, Beth.
They just can't get enough of you in class, so they had to come here too.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye, all. Take care.
Bye.